One of our customers had two French bulldogs, and the first one throughout her whole life was completely healthy and really had very few issues that actually made them go in and out of the vet clinic. And then the second one, of course, complete polar opposite, racked up $30,000 in vet bills, US dollars, in the first 3 years because the dog kept getting sick and they kept having to take him in. And I think even if your past experience has kind of taught you that, it could be one extreme or the other, or even just smaller kind of expensive bills that can rack up over time, I think just to your point, we shouldn't have to worry about having stacks of 10 grand lying around.
Welcome to the Call the Vet Show, the podcast that helps pet parents understand and optimize the health of their furry family so they can live the full and happy life you want for them. And here's your host, veterinarian Dr. Alex Avery.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Call the Vet Show. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're keeping safe. It's currently pouring with rain. Roads are closed. School is cancelled for tomorrow. I'm recording this on Sunday. But otherwise, we're dry, we're inside, we're warm, we're safe, and I hope it's the same for you. But that's enough about me. Today, I'm talking about a really important topic, but it's one that people probably don't really spend enough time thinking about when it comes to best caring for their pet. And that is how we're going to pay a significant bill if our pet is severely injured or becomes really unwell and needs a lot of tests or hospitalization for any length of time. This is a situation that really none of us ever want to be in, and we hope that we never are. We hope that our pet stays healthy from the day they're with us right into their old age. But unfortunately, the reality is that life happens. They get into mischief, some mishap comes their way, or they're one of the unfortunate individuals who does become unwell with a significant illness or injury. That said, the most common situation where we can get a significant bill is actually our longer term chronic condition. So these are things like arthritis, diabetes, allergic skin disease, where while each individual bill may not add up to too much, although sometimes they can be pretty significant in their own right, we're talking about treatment over a long period of time to make sure that our pets are living their healthiest, happiest life possible. So really, make no mistake, planning for the financial care of your pet could very well save their life, because the last thing any of us want to do is have to be put in a situation where we're talking about either treating your pet or actually euthanizing them based simply because of our financial ability to afford their care. And so today we're diving deep into the world of pet insurance, what all of the different types of policy there are, when you should consider pet insurance as an option for you, but also what the alternatives are and maybe some of the pros and cons of those options as well. And joining me today is Catherine from a company called Fursure, who compare lots of different insurance companies in the United States to make sure that people are getting the best policy for them. So who better to join me into this deep dive into the world of pet insurance and financial planning for your pet's care? And so without further ado, let's jump into today's show.
Here's this episode's expert interview.
Catherine, welcome to the Call the Vet Show. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about such an important topic. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here and chatting with you.
So insurance is a really important topic for people, for all pet owners to consider, whether it turns out being right for them or not. But it's something that's often given a second thought, or I think often people, come into insurance too late, which we'll probably touch on. But, why pet insurance? What got you interested in this whole kind of field in the first place?
I'll just give you a quick background on me. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I spent 18 years growing up there before coming to the US for college. While I was in college, I tried to start a company. It kind of shapeshifted 300 iterations of the wrong thing and ended up finding a small home somewhere. But I knew that I wanted to get back to building something of my own when I had kind of picked up some more skills. I ended up working in tech, learned a ton while doing that. But ultimately, I think what really drew me to this space and to work on pets and specifically insurance as the first problem that we solve is I'm currently a dog mom to an Australian Shepherd named Zushi. But before that, I had a cat named Simba. And Simba was like my pride and my joy. I still call every single human being I love in my life. So my parents, my boyfriend, my sister, my best friends, I call them all Simba, Yimba, and Yimby. And it hit me really hard when he got sick. He was the first life that I was responsible for. So I felt, extremely guilty. And he went from being what I thought was extremely healthy to being not. And he ultimately was diagnosed with lymphosarcoma cancer, and treatment cost $12,000. And I was in college at the time, and I had no idea cats could even get cancer. Like, I don't know if I'm an idiot, but the thought just never crossed my mind that was in the realm of possibility. And at that point, what should have been a medical decision to figure out what to do next. Should I get a second opinion? Like, how should I move forward with this? Like, should I just go running around, like talking to as many people as I knew about past experiences and what should be done? It was very much a financial decision because it costed over 10 grand. And very, very quickly, after about a week and a half, Simba ended up passing away. That experience really stuck with me, that amount of trauma in a short amount of time. And fast forward the years later, I finished college. I worked in tech, like I said, but I kept kind of coming back to this because I actually discovered only a couple of years ago that pet insurance really existed in a big way, and the products are actually good. So I can give you a little bit of history on pet insurance, but it wasn't always actually as good as the product is today. And I was kind of confused that no one had brought it up to me. So I became a little bit obsessed, poked further, talked to all my friends. I said, the friends that had pets, and I asked, do you have pet insurance? And of course they're like, oh no, but should I look into it? And with like 2 bits of information about what it is and how it could be beneficial, 15 of them signed up. So I thought that there was something really interesting, right? So I just kind of kept poking further, doing a little bit more research, figuring out across all the fine print of all the providers today, like what's really stopping people, but also what does the product really provide? Is pet insurance for everyone? Is it always worth it? Is it some combination? Or to your point, are there alternatives? So I think it's just a really fascinating space. And when it comes down to it, I'm at my best when I'm building for people that I love, and I love pet parents. So like-minded pet parents. And I think that that's ultimately what drew me to this space.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking when that decision goes from being what's best for the pet to what can we afford. And unfortunately, that is becoming probably more common. And I say that because, I mean, vets, you'll go online and you'll be like, oh, vets cost an awful lot of money. The reality is that the level of treatment that we can offer for some of these conditions has just skyrocketed. But unfortunately, with that comes incredibly expensive drugs. I mean, we all know how expensive human cancer drugs are, and there's no difference really with that with pets, and the level of expertise and other equipment that we use. So the costs do climb, and unfortunately, to provide the best care or the potential best care, it costs a lot of money, and you're faced with that bombshell of that diagnosis, and then the heartbreak of that's going to be $12,000, or I mean, that's a pretty big bill, but is probably not all that uncommon for a really involved condition like that. So that's the extreme end of the big massive bills that are going to be pretty much unaffordable for the vast majority of people without insurance. Hopefully those don't happen, but that doesn't mean that insurance is just for that, is it? So kind of what is insurance for in the broadest sense of the term? I mean, it seems fairly self-explanatory, but probably is not.
Yeah. I think the way to think about it too, and I'll just give you another story of kind of the extreme and then one of the less extreme, just a little bit more common. But one of our customers had 2 French bulldogs, and the first one throughout her whole life was completely healthy and really had very few issues that actually made them go in and out of the vet clinic. And then the second one, of course, complete polar opposite, racked up $30,000 in vet bills, US dollars, in the first 3 years because the dog kept getting sick and they kept having to take him in. And I think even if your past experience has kind of taught you that, it could be one extreme or the other, or even just smaller kind of expensive bills that can rack up over time, I think just to your point, we shouldn't have to worry about having stacks of 10 grand lying around for that rainy day or that catastrophic expense. And so I think that's what it really is there for those catastrophic big events. And then again, you kind of don't really know, if you think about pet insurance, like health insurance for your kid, which at this point, a lot of us do, like we're fully practicing parenting on our dogs and cats with or without our actual children, then you can think about it like anytime that our kid is getting sick or hurt and you need to bring them in, and vet costs, just knowing about the trajectory of vet costs, they've increased an obscene amount, like 73% in the last 10 years, maybe more than that even. And so to the point where basic things like An ACL tear, which you also hope would never happen, could cost upwards of $5,000 in some parts of the country. That's crazy. Or if they swallow something and need to get it removed, puppies love to shove things in their mouths. They have, like, as much as we love them and they're so cute, very little survival instincts. They're just like shoving things in their mouth. And that can cost like $3,000. And so I think we're just at a point where it doesn't really make sense to pay out of pocket anymore. And so what I would say is just the broad categories of pet insurance being good for is accidents and illnesses. So diseases, as well as any of those like unforeseen emergencies, injuries type problems. And what's kind of confusing about the way pet insurance works relative to human health insurance or any other types or flavors of insurance that most of us are not spending our time thinking about anyway, is pet insurance decouples unexpected from expected. So the like routine wellness costs are extricated from the unexpected costs. And only some insurance companies will offer you any type of coverage towards preventive care. Yeah. But that's a little bit how we think about the differences.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I think you've mentioned there the single events. The other real benefit that I see in the clinic is, say, your old arthritic Labrador, the cost of their medication over, they might be on that for 5 years, potentially, depending on what their makeup is. That really adds up to an awful lot and can become unaffordable. So, you've got your diabetic animal as well, for example, your animal with your cat with hypothyroidism, these are longer term conditions, often in older animals, but not always, that really will benefit. And the cost of your premium will be significantly less than the cost of those medications. But that then, I guess, ties in with, you mentioned getting health insurance for our children. I've got health insurance for my children. When should we be getting health insurance for our pets? Because we shouldn't be leaving it too late, should we, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about being from the UK too. So there's something in the US called pre-existing conditions, and it's how human health insurance was prior to 2008. Where pets just in the country are not protected by pre-existing conditions. In the UK, there are some companies that do cover pre-existing conditions, and there's a whole host of other kind of creative things that pet insurance companies in the UK are able to do that, due to regulations in the US, we're not able to do currently. Who knows how this will evolve and kind of innovate over time. But given the constraint that once something happens to your dog or cat, no insurance company will ever cover that thing ever. So like an eye infection or something like that, or like a skin growth, like a skin condition of some kind, especially like a chronic condition that could be like allergies, or an ACL tear, something that happens to a ligament. No insurance company will ever cover that. And so because of that, it behooves you to get on insurance ASAP, right when you bring your dog or cat home from the shelter, the breed, or the rescue, to get them covered. And I think increasingly a lot of folks are including it in the checklist of items. If I need to get water bowl, food bowl, in the dog's case, like a leash and a bunch of things, and find them a vet, also just get insurance and then just kind of get it, be done and move on. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do is just help people feel really confident that they're making the right decisions, that they're good to go and almost don't really have to worry about it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, when we see a new puppy or kitten, it's in our list of things that we talk about in that very first consultation for that very reason. I mean, I think back, you talk about me being from the UK, and insurance is a huge thing in the UK. And I've kind of heard anecdotally that things are a little bit kind of behind in the uptake in the US. Certainly in New Zealand, where I am now, we're very far behind. But it's gone from a stage where maybe 10 years ago, people were like you were and saying, "Oh, I got no idea what pet insurance is. I've never heard of it," to now people have heard about it and are thinking about it, and more are taking it up, which is fantastic from my point of view, because then that money conversation and that money aspect of the decision gets taken away, which is great. But I kind of think back to actually a client of mine who I've just been kind of helping along this insurance journey, because we first saw them. Their dog had a very mild skin infection on its tummy, just because of how it had been raised with the breeder. 3 years later, it has got skin allergies that are completely unrelated. But the first kind of comeback from the insurance company was, no, that's not covered because we've already had the skin problem. It's certainly in my experience, actually, a lot of insurance companies, and certainly the better ones, will then, open that discussion. And if the vet, argues the case, if you like, that you can get that decision reversed. But that, is not where you want to be. And a lot of the time, you're absolutely right. They're completely excluded. And certainly in my experience, some of the less reputable insurance companies, I'd tell people they just say no. And I tell people their, primary goal is to make money for their shareholders, not to save your pet. So we've got to, have that in mind. So With exclusions, I wonder from a US point of view, are there any kind of breed specific exclusions? So I'm thinking like the pug that you spoke about, or the French bulldog, sorry, they often have problems with their breathing. Are they always covered, or is that something that people need to think about?
Such a great question. I think as we become more educated on the breeds of the specific pets that we get, and a lot of pet parents are asking, hey, I have a French bulldog, or I have a German Shepherd, and I know that they're prone to hip dysplasia, or versus the bulldog that has the breathing issues.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are becoming aware of that, which is awesome. When it comes to the insurance companies, I would say 5+ years ago, there were a lot of exclusions, including breed-specific exclusions, as well as cancer, other like very serious treatments and high-cost procedures weren't covered. Now all of it is covered. So you don't need to worry about anything other than just knowing that your breed has a higher likelihood or is more predisposed to having those issues. And the insurance company, if you get one from a good company, and also make sure that your annual limit is a reasonable one, it's not small like 1,000 or 3,000, because ultimately bills can be significantly higher than that. And the difference between an unlimited annual limit or like a 10,000 one is often very negligible difference between like a much smaller. Makes no sense to have that kind of cap. Then I think you should be good to go.
Cool. Yeah. No, so it sounds like the product is actually improving a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's still room, but it's getting a lot better than it was, which is fantastic. Because I guess the other frustration that people have had in the past is that, hey, I've got insurance. This is great. I can do this stuff. And then the answer comes back, no, you're not covered for this. And you think, well, why have I been paying?
Like a double whammy, right? Where you're paying diligently for this thing that you think you're getting coverage for. Yeah. And then when push comes to shove, it's not actually covered, or you're being helped when you need it the most. And I think that that's the thing that all of us are trying to avoid. And ultimately, it's good when everyone is educated on what is covered and what isn't. And I think that there's some element too of how do we make the product more intuitive so that most people will understand what isn't covered in a way that doesn't involve, spending hours and hours researching, digging into every letter in the fine print, because that's just not reasonable.
Yeah, and then preferably having a vet degree as well, so you can actually understand what's being written and how likely that is. Because it's the insurance industry as a whole, isn't it? You think of human health, your car, your house insurance, and how many of us read that small print in any detail? Yeah, I certainly don't. And I'm sure most people are in exactly the same way. So with that in mind, like we've got all of these, great insurance companies out there that are doing a better job and are providing a better product. There's still differences between their policies. So what kind of differences do people need to be aware of? So I'm thinking, differences in cover. We've got accident versus illness, copay, excesses. What's that kind of picture like in the US particularly?
Yeah, I would say that there's 2 different ways to think about it. The first is there's 3 main factors where you can kind of determine how good a pet insurance policy is. And I'll talk about those in a second. And then the second way to think about it is also just on the nuances between the coverage that different providers offer. And there are nuances where not all pet insurance policies are created equal. Some of them have more comprehensive coverage, but at a higher price. The work that we tried to do is find you the best coverage at the best price, because ultimately that's at the end of the day how we make our decisions is of all the set of things, find me the best value for coverage. And so I'll talk about that in a sec too. So as far as the 3 factors go that everyone, it's kind of just small decisions that you get to make to decide what plan you want to get. The first is the annual limit. So we talked about that, which is to say, what is the cap to how much the insurance company is going to pay to you in any given year or over the lifetime? And you want that to be high within reason, or just as high as it possibly can be, because you don't want to skimp on when the push comes to shove and there's a catastrophic bill that costs a lot of money, and you don't want to be capped out at some arbitrary number. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the deductible. So how much you're on the hook for before you get money back. And of course, like there's varying levels of like insurance savviness across all of our customers. It's important to note that it's just this amount. You can choose, it's a range between 100 to 1,000. The most common choices are 250 and 500. The higher you go, the higher you're on the hook for, the cheaper the price. And so it actually does have a big impact on that monthly premium price. And then the third and final toggle or factor or decision that you get to make is the reimbursement percentage, which is how much are you actually getting back from the insurance company when something happens, you want that to be as high as possible. And so typically it goes from like 70%, 80%, 90%. A couple of providers now have 100%. So once you're done with the deductible, they'll give you about 100. We recommend 80 or 90 just because, you're going to want as much of that money back as possible. So that's kind of the parameters that I would say each policy can define whether a good one or a bad one is. Because when you go in and you're looking at these things, you're like, I don't know how to think about these. And so that's kind of how we like to break that down. And then across the nuances between providers, some providers have amazing reputations for customer service, but then they don't cover dental illness whatsoever. They'll cover dental accidents, but no periodontal disease, gingivitis. And you as a vet know that the stats are high likelihood that a dog or a cat is going to have some type of dental issue.
Absolutely. Well, it's 80% of dogs and cats by the age of 3 have tartar present. So it's hugely, and that used to be something, dental disease used to be something that no one ever covered, if I'm going back to when I started. But now, more and more are doing that. And I think there's the caveat there a lot, or certainly in the UK, that as long as that dental procedure is carried out within maybe 6 months of the recommendation or 12 months of the recommendation being made, so that's another thing that we need to be aware of.
Right. And when it comes to your teeth, like your dog's teeth, you aren't thinking about it this way, but it's classified differently across 3 bits. The first is accident. So if there's any accident, you need to extract teeth or reconstruct teeth, that's always covered by most companies. The second piece of dental illnesses is not always covered by any means. Some of the great companies have great comprehensive coverage, but of course they could be a little higher in price. It kind of just depends. You can find that coverage. And then a lot of them that do offer coverage, they may have a stipulation saying that you need to get teeth cleaning, which is that third category of like, this is routine preventive care. But most companies, unless you're getting a wellness plan, will not cover teeth cleanings. And so it makes no intuitive sense as a consumer to be like, okay, would I really break it up into these 3 different sections? But when you go to that extra level of detail, I think, and that's what we try to do, is personalize people's options based on what matters to them. Because someone might not care at all about that type of coverage. They just want the best value for coverage and not have to worry too much about dental, but they really care about being able to travel internationally with their pet. So that's like another dimension that some providers will just have US or Canada, but some will let you go anywhere around the world for up to 6 months of the year. And as long as the bill's translated into English, it'll get covered. And so there's just certain nuances like that. I think a lot of folks are now doing behavioral therapy or like behavioral consultations, and some providers will offer some type of coverage there. There's like holistic and alternative treatments. So really the list goes on. And I think that the insurance companies, for better or for worse, I think it's a good thing that they're being forced to compete and need to innovate on behalf of the consumer to ultimately offer, more holistic coverage across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. It's only competition is only a good thing from that point of view. It doesn't necessarily drive down price, but it improves the product and the service that's being offered and things like that. So I find that really interesting about your kind of copay and excess and things like that. So unless things have changed dramatically since I was in the UK, which is always possible, but it was often the standard was you had the set excess. So that would be, £100 or £150 or whatever it was. But then actually everything else was covered on top of that. So it wasn't, you were not normally picking a percentage of amount being repaid. Over here, we've certainly got that option, but then we've got the copay, which is 20% you paid of the bill, and the insurance covers the other 80%. One thing I guess that we really need to bear in mind in that, and all of these decisions come down to your individual situation and your financial situation and all that kind of thing. But it can be really frustrating to say, well, you've got a really high excess, say you've got $1,000 before they'll pay anything. But then that becomes limiting to actually getting the initial care that your pet needs. So, then it becomes a false saving, if you like, in your premium, or you're only choosing 70% copay. That 30% of a $12,000 bill is still a significant amount of money that you need to pay, isn't it? So that's really where the difficulty comes in. So, there's so much going on there. It's very difficult to compare or to by yourself know which policy is best for you. So, that's where kind of your service comes in, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the way that we like to think about it is this is just expert advice from people who have poured through the fine print, work with. And so, by the way, we're totally free to the pet owner. And how we make money is we have relationships as a typical broker route. We have relationships with all the reputable pet insurance companies. So if a pet parent decides to go through us, sign up with our referral link, then we'll make a commission on that policy sold. And our hope is to build trusting relationships with our customers, like help them with a whole host of other problems. Like we're not doing this today, but our customers are already asking us, what's the best vet to go to? Like I just moved to a new area. Like, please help me find the best one, or how should I think about nutrition? So I think that there's a whole host of potential opportunities, but really this first problem that people have of, I don't want to spend hours and hours researching, or even if I have, I'm still not confident that I have the best choice. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what you care about most. So I have a 1-year-old or 1.5-year-old Australian Shepherd named Zushi that lives with me in this zip code. male, and I want to know what's best for me. Like, I don't really care what's best for other people. And I know that it's not one size fits all. And so what we try to do is personalize options based on not just everything that we know about the coverage that exists out there, but specifically about the pet owners, right? And the pet owners, pets, age, breed, gender, zip code, but then also budget range. Like, what is there a cap that you don't want to go above? You're like, mentally, I don't want to pay more than $50 a month because I can't do that right now. And I don't plan to in the future. So I just want to keep it under there and like, let's find me the best one within that range. What kind of lifestyle are they having? Are they super active or kind of a little bit more chill and relaxed and sedentary? But I think all of these things kind of affect, and maybe even your childhood experiences with your pet and the things that you definitely want to watch out for. And so we try to take into account all of those different things to ultimately score. And we have a scoring mechanism that scores the companies based on those dimensions to get you feeling confident. We usually give top 2 choices and then you can get to pick and choose between those, but still look at the other options.
Cool. And how long does that process take people?
Less than a minute.
Less than a minute. That's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. For those of us who have been through insurance sites and you fill in all your details and then you have to reload the page and then you have to, wait for the email back for the quote. Yeah. I mean, it's a 20-minute process, probably more for each individual company. Awesome. So the other thing I wanted to talk about and be interested in the US, because I think the financial situation and how we actually end up paying the vet is very different. So in the UK, in New Zealand, we give our service and we pay at the end. Whereas I think in the US, it's often, certainly for the bigger surgeries, you're kind of paying up front and then, your pet's having that procedure. How does the submitting the insurance kind of work? Who gets paid? Because I guess one common thing that we also get is that, well, I've got insurance, so that means I'm not going to have to pay anything at all. And then the vet goes, well, actually, you need to pay, and the insurance company reimburses you. And there's a large amount of friction there because we still need to have that kind of money available to pay. So I'd love to hear your take and your experience on that as well.
I think this piece is an incredibly important one because when it comes down to it, there's a lot of people that don't have a ton of money that they can pay for those expensive bills. Hopefully the vast majority of the cases are just kind of the common, in and out, really not that expensive. But even in those cases, because of how pet insurance works, you're paying upfront and then you get reimbursed by the pet insurance company later. The benefit of that is there's no in-network or out-of-network with the vet clinics and the doctors that work in the US. You get to go to any vet hospital all throughout the US or Canada. So you get that flexibility, but then the downside is the friction of needing to submit the claim. Thankfully, the insurance companies have improved over time, and there's just a simple app where you take a photo of the vet's invoice, upload it, and enter in a couple pieces of information about it, and then you ultimately get reimbursed. Some are faster, a couple of days. Some are slower, like 2 to 4 weeks, maybe even after 4 weeks. And I think that piece is a crucial one. From a consumer's perspective, we care about a credit card billing cycle. Like, I think the majority of us will worry about that. Also, just having the money up front is a huge issue for the majority of the country.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some innovation that's needed on the part of the insurance companies to make that a less friction-filled process. And it's also one of the reasons, given how expensive bills have gotten for the catastrophic expensive procedures, if people don't have that money up front, going through something like Care Credit or another service that are kind of like high interest rate loans, basically, to bridge the gap.
Yeah, which are less than ideal, but if needs must. I mean, that sounds like it's a lot easier. I remember in my first job, like one of my jobs was to fill out all of the insurance forms, which took quite a lot of time. We were photocopying, bills. We were sending all the clinical histories. We were having to write our own little kind of veterinary spiel as well. So yeah, I think things have got a lot more streamlined, thankfully. I guess one thing that I'd like to say, because the biggest cause of complaints for vets is the financial aspect. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole different conversation there about actually the value, the ACL costing $5,000. Well, if it's us, it's probably like $25,000 and your dog's having a very similar surgery. So, putting that scheme on things, it's expensive and no one's denying that, but the value is pretty amazing. But the other thing is the cash flow. So a lot of vets are small businesses. And like you say, if it's taking 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get that reimbursement without knowing, is the client just telling us they're insured and they're actually not, and we're never going to see them again, which unfortunately every vet has been burnt with that. And after you've lost however many thousands of dollars, you become a little bit more hard-nosed. But just the cash flow of a small business, that is really problematic. So that's the big reason. There's this problem with the speed of payment, whether they're going to, the insurance company, if they are insured, is going to come back and say, well, actually, that's not covered. And then the client goes, well, I thought they were, and I actually don't have the money to pay for that. So, that's the reason why. And I think, there's a lot of friction there because, ultimately money is what makes the world go round. It's what puts food on our table as professionals. And the last thing we want to do as well is to have that, money discussion and that being the limiting factor. But unfortunately, sometimes it is. So I guess that's, my take on that really.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to doing your job and doing right by the pet and the pet parent, ultimately you don't want those conversations and decisions to have to be made on the limiting factor of money and of financial savings that are racked up over time. And if there's enough right now to move forward and have to present them with like plan A, B, C, D, E, and it's based on, hey, here's the best care that we can actually give, but it's the most expensive or one of the most expensive. You go all the way down the list and not give them the care that I think they need. And I think that that's a tension, but I do think that there's tech that should be able to help along the way. I still think it's crazy that for folks that have insurance to go into the vet office and move forward with any type of procedure to not know whether it's covered or not. That seems to be pretty bare bones, just to help from a knowledge perspective on both parties of the vet as well as the pet owner of what's going to eventually happen. And I think that we're going to see a lot of innovation happening in that sphere. Like at least there's one pet insurance company that does direct billing and direct pay. And I think that that's been a big undertaking. And I think that it requires also some enthusiasm, willingness, excitement on the part of the vet to be able to aid in that process, right? And make it easier since it is a win-win. So I'm curious to explore that.
Yeah, certainly in the UK, the practice that I was with, we did accept direct claims from one particular insurance company because we could have worked with them and we were confident that they, 99.9% of the time, they would pay and they would pay very quickly. Insurance companies, they do have pre-authorization processes. Certainly in the UK, they did. I would imagine they do in New Zealand. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but that can sometimes be a pretty involved procedure, filling out lots of forms and the answer then comes back 2 or 3 days later, which is no use if you've got a dog with, a bone stuck in its intestines and it needs surgery now. Tech has changed a lot of things and there's certainly, watch this space for all the innovation that it could be. But the easier it's made, the better. And personally, I'm more than happy. And actually, we have a relatively low number of insured clients. Unfortunately, that is changing, but it means that we are more happy with accepting direct claims to pay us because we're able to better keep track of it. We know those clients, maybe better. So that is something we are offering. But yeah, like I say, that's not the reality for most, unfortunately. So yeah, there's a whole load of different things that we could go into.
And I think at least like just from the standpoint of all the innovation that's happened on the vet tech side and vet medicine side, the reason why things are expensive these days and insurance is a viable option for people is because you have procedures now that weren't available before. You have all of this advancement in tech and medicine when it comes to the veterinary space that ultimately we can do things that we could only ever do on humans before, right? Yeah. And unthinkable, right? You have like dog oncologists and you have like CT scans and other things that I think really move the needle. So I think that that's definitely the optimistic side. And we just need to kind of figure out how we make the world a better place for pets and for pet parents and their wallets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting better. So we're heading in the right direction, at least. For those people who maybe insurance, they are not in a position to pay that regular policy or their financial situation is that, hey, they've got loads of money and they don't need to worry about it, which would be lovely, wouldn't it? But yeah, what are the alternatives to insurance? Because I think it's important that people do have some kind of plan, even if that doesn't end up being an insurance product for their pet.
I think that's a really well-phrased question because when it comes to whether pet insurance is for everyone, the answer is no. And you have that group of people that if they can afford to self-insure and they have lots of savings racked up, like that's great, that they can withstand multiple catastrophic bills, but that's not most people, right? If you also have a much older pet that has many, what they would call pre-existing conditions. And the price is just price prohibitive at that point. It's just too expensive. Doesn't really make sense cost benefit wise. I would say that's also not a great candidate. And I think for the folks that are just a little leery of insurance and just want a little bit of help, obviously my quick plug is come to us and we'll talk you through. There's plenty of people that we said, hey, it's not a good option, but here's what you can think about instead. I do think that it's got to be a combination of having some savings and a potential like catastrophic plan where you're transferring the risk of massive catastrophe to an insurance company and not have to withstand that or self-insure, so to speak. And that savings piece is important, but it does take time to rack up, right? I think many of us, myself included, not the best at budgeting. And so I think having that for the rainy day when you need it, but knowing that you're kind of steadily working toward that savings, I think that that'll ultimately help. And then when it comes to just straight up alternatives, there's actually a couple. There's discounted veterinary plan. So there's a company called Fursure that I've heard good things about. We haven't personally worked with them yet, but I do think as we kind of grow our company, we're going to bring on more partners, more offerings, just because ultimately people want optionality and they want to know what the best is of all the set of the things that exist out there. There's also like a crowd kind of community fund called USO that people can look into. They're actively saying that they're not insurance. And I think that there's a little bit of nuance around how much it is per month and how it can change over time. But I do think that it's kind of going back to the models like insurance. At the end of the day, you're transferring risk. It's also one payment method of many. There are many other options that you could consider. And I think that savings is probably my best answer to that. But I think you don't want to be caught in a scenario where you're stuck paying multiple expensive bills over the however many year time horizon. And you're just kind of kicking yourself because at that point you won't get maximal coverage because of pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, and going back to your first story of owner with two Frenchies, if they'd been saving, they might have been all right in the sense that their first dog was healthy. So they had built up that savings for the, ridiculous expenses that their second dog. But if that second dog was actually their first, then, they wouldn't have had that savings pot built up to then be able to afford it. So that's the difficulty with that route. Certainly as I see it, is that you may be in a situation where you're actually caught short because it's not old age where your pet becomes ill and needs that money. It's actually when they're a lot younger.
Exactly. And I think there's something about the data too, about early kind of puppies, kittens, just in that first year or the second year is when they actually have like the most claims throughout the whole lifetime. So it's like, oh, wow, of course. And it's also too.
Yeah, start to life and end of life is when, the bills really rack up, really. Yeah, because start of life, they're discovering the world. They're getting into all kinds of mischief and mayhem. And then at the end of, towards the end of their life in their senior years, the time has taken its toll. And that's when we see all these more longer term chronic things. So.
And then in that middle phase is when it's the steady state and you think it's just fully calm, peaceful, we're settled into the routine. And then if you quit insurance at that point, then you're getting hit with a double whammy where you've paid for years, didn't get a ton out of it. And then when the time comes that you need it, I've just heard so many stories like that. And it's just unfortunate that we have to play within the confines of the way that it works today. But I think as long as people are more aware, and hopefully we can bring more awareness there, then we can make decisions that we feel confidently about. And ultimately, at the end of the day, can give them the best care that they need.
Fantastic, Catherine. So where can people go to all this information about the best insurance policy for them? Where would you like to send people?
So our company's name is Fursure, Fursure. And so if you just go to getfursure.com, we'll help you out there.
Fantastic. So yeah, head over there, have a little look, see what's right for you. And I think the most important take home for me is that people need to think about finances ahead of time and make the best decision for them rather than burying head in sand and going, my pet's going to stay healthy, because hopefully they will, but chances are they're going to need some intervention at some point, aren't they?
Right. And we love them so much too, that when something happens, what are we going to do? Not pay for it. So it's just, just avoiding that traumatizing decision where there really isn't a great answer.
Yeah. Fantastic. Catherine, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I've certainly learned a lot, about the US, and it is different to the UK and New Zealand, hugely valuable. And it's one that could absolutely save individual animals' lives. So really, really important. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Helping your pet live the happy, healthy life they deserve.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topics that we covered today. Have you got your pets insured? Do you think it's a waste of time? Has it actually resulted in them getting treatment that otherwise there's no way on earth you'd have been able to provide for them? I'd love to hear. You can find me over on Instagram at Our Pets Health. So send me a DM, comment on one of my posts there, and I'd love to start that conversation with you. And I'd also love to hear if you self-insure. Do you have a savings account for your pet? Are there any other options that people should be considering that we didn't discuss today? And remember too that you can get all of the show notes and the details and links that we discussed today over at callthevet.org. Finally, remember to share this episode if you found it helpful with other pet lovers in your circle on whatever social platform you choose to use. It helps me reach more pets, more pet parents, and allows me to impact and help improve and optimize their health. So thank you in advance for sharing this episode. And until next time, I'm veterinarian Dr. Alex. This is the Call the Vet Show. because they're family.
That's it for this episode of the Call the Vet Show. Be sure to visit callthevet.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. We'll see you next time.